Of natural turf pitches, but mainly procedural rather than getting into heavy technical stuff. So, a bit of a background on myself. As Richard said, I'm originally from Kilkenny. I've built approximately 250 pitches globally over 17 years working in the industry. I'm the author of the 2008 FAI guideline, which is very much a Bible. I mean, everyone says 2008. It's the most relevant document available. It's available free. There's associations all over the world who are downloading this, copying it and sending it out to their members. So realistically, that's a very, very important document when you're looking at natural turf. And indeed, the synthetic turf document is also very important as well. I work for the GAA, IRFU, FEI, that should be FAI. But what I like to try to do is introduce a practical approach to project delivery. I do all my work by referral, so I don't get into heavy advertising or that sort of thing. Most of my work comes from referral. I'm the official consultant for UEFA for Euro 2016, and my services are basically design, consultancy, project management. Here's just some publications. I'm the author of the FIFA guideline, which is the Bible for facility development globally, translated into 35 languages, and also the natural turf guideline by the FAI. So today what we're going to talk about is considerations for natural turf pitch development. And some of these, like although I offer services in natural turf and synthetic turf, I know my colleagues from Sport Labs are here to talk about synthetic turf. So I'm going to focus on my I suppose practical experience in delivering projects from natural turf perspective. And what we want to try to do is reiterate the structured approach and the tick box approach in each case to avoid the pitfalls and avoid pictures like this, where you have a trench that's supposed to be 100 mil wide and it's 500 mil wide. There's 6 times more gravel used and it's just a mess. And generally the type of projects we can have, really, you have new pitch constructions, you have existing pitch upgrades and schemes, and you'll start with your feasibility, as Richard said, your feasibility, your Inception, your specification, your construction works, aftercare and maintenance, sign off and approval. And I've even gone a step further in the project itself and added another 2 stages just to make sure that stuff is correct. So if we look at the inception and feasibility, what we want to try and do first of all is investigate the ground, okay? I want to look at the ground conditions. I want to look at the grass quality that's there initially. I want to look at the topography, which is the levels on the area. Drainage outlets is a huge issue. Where is this water going to go if we drain a pitch? You can't just dig a hole in the ground and hope that it's going to disappear. You have to do a feasibility study to make sure that the ground will be able to take this drainage water if you're going to do that. It's a very, very risky part of any drainage project. Access for trucks, for contractors, for general public, health and safety, that also needs to be considered. And the timing available as well as the budget. So these are, stage 1. That I really love that first stage of every project, because I try to, when I go into a committee room, I want to stimulate debate. I want to have a good row, right, between everybody, and get everybody's views out on the table very early. Because there's no point halfway through the job saying, I told you so now, lads, shouldn't have gone this direction, should have gone this direction. You want to get that out of the way at a very, very early stage. And if we're looking at an existing pitch perspective, profiles are very, very important. This is a soil profile from a natural turf pitch. And what I'm looking at here is designing a drainage system. And although everybody says, the guys up the road did a drainage system, why can't we just do that? I can honestly say with my hand on my heart, I have never done 2 identical projects in them 250 pitches. Every one of them are different in some way, shape or form. You will never have, we've got 2 stadiums here, Croke Park and Aviva Stadium. And the 2 pitches are nowhere like each other because they're designed for different things. And although they might look the same on match day, they're very, very different constructions. And it's the very same with natural turf pitches. And although the guidelines are there to give you a guide, okay, which I have to say some of the better contractors will follow that guideline, there is others who won't. And suddenly you'll see a bid come through, or the famous estimates, and you look at him saying, he can't be doing that for that money. And you start digging a bit deeper then, and you find out he's not complying with that document at all. So that's your first reference point. That natural turf document is your first reference point. I can't stress that enough. But you can see here to the left, we've got a nice crumb structure on the soil, and that will be a different type of drainage system that I'll install compared to the one on the right, which is a heavy clay soil, which is compact. And my aim in this case would be to try and bypass that. You know, fellas will talk to you about aeration and rooting and grass. Forget about it. We're in Ireland. You have to bypass the soil if you're going to get a pitch to work. And unless you bypass the soil, you cannot rely on natural soil in this country to drain sufficiently for football. If we're growing grass for cows, that's fine. They'll take a wet paddock, okay? If we're growing grass for footballers, we can't. We have to bypass the soil in 99% of circumstances if you want a well-drained pitch. So concepts of lots of aeration. We need sand, we need aeration, but as part of a drainage solution. And on bigger jobs, this is a job in Offaly there where we're developing 5 pitches down there for the GAA at the moment. And where we're into new ground in terms of, you know, massive cut and fill operations and regrading ground, I really want to go right down to see what's underneath. I do not want to be in the middle of a job and have a contractor come back to me and tell me we've hit rock or we've hit a wet area, I need an extra. You need to nail out all these at a very early stage. And I would have peppered that site with an excavator over 2 weekends to make sure I was confident of the ground conditions. Now, you can go the other direction as well, and you can spend £10,000 on ground investigations. Nobody has that kind of money, you know, so I try like a middle ground. Hire a fella for a couple of £100 a day with an excavator, get a professional consultant like myself or somebody else to review them holes. You'll have a fairly good idea going forward on what you're dealing with. But in this case, I was looking, and I was looking very hard for ground for soak away, so that the water I was draining, there was no outlet, and I needed to develop soakaways on the site. So that was one of the more complex ones. And I suppose when we're looking at existing grass pitches, this is a fairly common type of image that we see around the country where, you know, the pitch is flooded, the surface is smeared, and they want a drainage system. And I suppose we've got other scenarios where works have been done already. And here's a pitch that's newly drained, but you can actually see the grass on the drains is perfect and the water's holding in between the drains. And the problem here is that topography wasn't taken into account, the levels on the pitch. So the contractor ran the length of the pitch, which was the easiest run and the quickest run to get in and out, but the water's running between the drains. Think of it, the water will run the easiest way, and it's not going to intercept these drains. So really those should have been at an angle so that the water caught them and down into the drainage. Simple mistake to make. So if we look at the type 1 pitch, which is the pipe drained pitch, this is the pitch which, you know, these are the mainstay of Irish pitches. But I suppose 20, 30 years ago, the pipe drained pitch to a traditional type of Teagasc agricultural drainage plan would have been acceptable. Really, these are, you know, they're very, very, very basic. And in my experience, just installing pipe drainage on its own will not give you what you need in these circumstances. The drainage is installed using trenching machines. They can be on tracks, they can be on tractors. I tend to try and avoid schemes where we're bringing excavators onto natural turf pitches for pipe drainage installation. What you'll tend to find is the excavating bucket is too big, and although you will install the drainage with them, the trench is too wide, and in the summertime, if you don't have irrigation, you're going to see a massive amount of trenches opening up. Your type 2, which is the most common and most popular type of pitch, is your pipe and slit drain pitch. And this is where most of the pitches in the country are developed in terms of this type of technique. We have a series of pipe drains at engineered centres. That means that The consultant will decide, is it a 3 metre centre, is it a 5 metre centre, is it a 7 metre centre, based on ground conditions, based on my soil analysis, based on topography. And the spacing of all these is quite a specific task. It's not something that you just say, sure, look, there you go, rattle it out and put them in at 6 metre centres and you'll be fine. Because you do have to calculate the water flow and whether or not this will work. We've then got these connections. I might just go, have we got a pointer, Rich, or what way does that work?
I'll get you one.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Okay, so we've got these slit drains here, okay? And these are what catch the water and take it down into the ground, into the pipe drain and out. So what we have here is the water falls on the surface, okay? It moves either direction, into the slit, out, into the pipe, and to your outlet. And that's the basic concept of it. So the slits are doing most of the hard work of getting that surface water off the surface. Now what you can have in existing natural turf problems, pitches, is that the topography here and the levels here are bad. Now if you have a hole in here, that water is not going to move out a hole into the slit and out. And this is something you need to consider at specification stage. And one of the more modern ways of thinking on that type of problem is to use a machine called a top drain, which will put these in at 500 mil centres. So you're literally draining every square metre of the pitch, rather than 2 and 3 metre centres. Realistically, when these go beyond 1.5 metres, the effectiveness is much less. And I see people putting these in at 3 metre centres. Forget about it. You're better off. Keep your money until you can afford to do it correctly. Another thing which is relatively new way of thinking, I know that Clive done here on the FAI and has been a huge success, has been the installation of these at construction stage. What we were finding in some of these projects 5-6 years ago was these projects were actually, do I need a mic over there, do I? Okay, sorry. These projects were actually taking 2 and 3 years to complete. Because we were coming back in year 2 to install these, then we were trying to reseed them, then we were trying to get back and so your average pipe and slit drainage job was taking in the region of 2 years. It's not really enough, it's not acceptable anymore. If we start a job in April, I would be hoping in some cases you could be on the pitch that year. In other cases, definitely early the following year. This idea that the pitch needs a year to settle down is an old wives' tale, right? Modern grasses grow very, very quickly, and if you can hit it at that right time of the year in April, run through a summer, a decent summer. You have to have a decent summer to build it, which, in fairness, this summer was quite decent that way in terms of building pitches. You should be in a position where the following year you're on the pitches. And here's a picture from Tipperary. I'd say Clive will start crying when he remembers that one, because it was where the machine hit rock, and that's actually on in Ballydoyle racing for Aidan O'Brien. And it basically, but again, in fairness to CRL, they trenched through the rock and they completed the job with no additional items. And that's the installation machine there, where you can see the machine cuts the trench into the ground, backfilling with gravel, and then we come again on the top with sand. Neat installation is essential. Again, nice, neat, clean installation is very important. And you want good ground conditions to be working like this. The type 3 is the sand carpet pitch. And these types of pitches do tend to be a bit more popular in the north of the country than the south. Now, there is a reason for that. And that is that there is a particular type of sand available in Northern Ireland, which is a washed sand recovered from the loch. And it's almost a balance between a sand and a soil. And these pitches do tend to work well up there using that particular type of sand. However, they do get dry in summer and very, very firm. So we need to consider, when are we going to be playing our games, first of all. Second of all, have we the budget to build them and fertilise them and grow grass on them? And third of all, are we happy with that performance issue in summer where they'll get that bit firm? I'm not a huge fan of sand carpet pitches because I feel that clubs do not have the budget to maintain them. And no matter where I've gone, this is where it ends up. That's 100 mil of sand. You've got the top 50 mil completely gunged up with organic matter, grass clippings, divots, that sort of thing. And this pitch, which is quite a well-known pitch, actually, it's not from this association, it's from one of the other associations. This pitch is notorious, and yet is probably one of the most expensively built pitches in the country. Now, it's not either Croke Park or Aviva before you think about it, but thankfully, but and it's notorious. And it's performing like an old soil-based pitch, even though there's 100 mil of the finest Wexford sand you can buy. So the sand carpets are a challenge to manage. And finally, the Type 4, which probably, I mean, I love this type of construction. This is the gravel raft construction. I was the one who sort of introduced it to the country about 10 years ago. And this is designed, anyone here from Bale na Mulla? That was the one we installed in Bale na Mulla to get over the ground condition problems down there where they had a moving bog. And if I've got a moving bog, or if I've got very bad ground conditions, or if I've got rock, that sort of thing, this is the type of construction I'll use. I'm not going to go into massive detail on it. It's quite a specific type of construction, and it is a good bit more expensive than your traditional construction. So again, I'll leave it for afterwards to talk about.
There's your pointer there.
There's a pointer there.
the laser won't work on the screen. It's working down below, it won't work on the screen. So
okay, that's grand.
Pointer, right?
So when we've gone through this initial phase of feasibility and inception, really what we want to be doing is recommending and agreeing a project control plan, right? And that doesn't really move from there. We're going there and that's it. That's what we're going to do. That's what we have the money to do. This is the timeline. This is the budget. And the options on construction are presented and debated. The procurement approach is also presented, which I'll go through in a moment. The timing of the works, when we're going to procure this thing, when we're going to deliver it. The budget is obviously critical. You have to have accurate budgeting at that stage. And I know a lot of you have the money already from the department and quite possibly are basing it on a few contractor estimates or bids or whatever else. I think you could either get a fairly pleasant surprise or a fairly nasty shock when you start to get an independent consultant involved. Because suddenly they'll actually look and say, for example, I saw one of these jobs, pipe and slit job, it was 3 years ago, and these slits were in at a certain rate. These things here. I think they were going to put in 30,000 metres of these things for 15,000 euros. It's 50 cent a metre. I said I wouldn't even buy the gravel. And when I looked into it, it wasn't a slit drain at all. It was a forced gravel mow, which don't work in this country. And suddenly, their whole estimate was out the window, and their focus was on the number 30,000 metres of drainage is better than 10,000 metres of drainage. But what I had to explain to them is no, 10,000 metres of drainage done with the proper machine, the proper materials, is far better than 30,000. And again, it's important to think that way, and that's one of your first tasks. And I'm not just selling my own services here, but you do have to look independently at what you're trying to do and look at your ground conditions. And it's not just the same as going down the road to the club down the road and doing the same thing as them. So we have an interim report, which we issue at that stage. The presentation and discussion then comes around the report. We agree the final control plan, and then we say, right, that's what we're going to do. And that's where we're at. So the next stage then is design and specification. And this is where we produce a detailed methodology for the works. That means we detail out every single item, every single product, every single gravel, every sand, everything else that we want to use for this project. Because we need to get like-for-like bids. If you don't have like-for-like bids, it makes procurement really difficult and it turns into a pony show. And unfortunately, although certain, contractors can be very good at presenting and have lots of experience on their CV, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the best solution for your club. Every situation has to start fresh. And good, clear quality assurance parameters, clear drawings, schedules of rates, forms of tender, and contract conditions are important. And I've tendered in the past year probably in the region of about €5 million worth of work. And we're currently working with 6 contractors around the country. And you have to also put yourself in the contractor's shoes. He's sitting in his office and he's waiting, and the next thing this document comes. And he looks at it and he says, sure, that's nonsense. That's not going to work. And yet he's forced into bidding for it. And he says, well, sure, look, I'll bid, I'll put in a price, I'll see how it goes and try to get to the table and then I'll tell them. You don't want that type of situation. You want them getting the document. You want to be able to price the document clearly, cleanly and quickly and get it in. And then if they don't get the job, there's not going to be an almighty row. But if you ask a contractor to come in 5 or 6 times, do 5 or 6 different options, and then put them through the ringer again on procurement, it's going to build up a level of tension. And that's what we try to do, is clear, concise documents, transparent, there's no hiding, everything is in there, it's easy to price. And that's important, because if it's easy to price, you're going to get more accurate bidding. And the form of tender is basically where they write, just like a cheque, 112,100, and that's their final price of everything in the document. And that's what we're interested in at procurement stage initially. But I suppose you have to remember also, clubs have a tendency to think that contracts work one way. But contracts work both ways. Contract is there to protect the contractor as well as the club. So there's obligations on both parties, and one of those obligations is having the money to pay for it. And I see so many instances where the money is in place to pay for the first instalment, and then suddenly, well, we're waiting on the department to sign off this, and the whole project grinds to a halt. The contractor's on site, it's raining, the machinery is there, it's a mess. So you have to have a good cash flow agreed, and you have to have your procedure for drawdown agreed, because you can't expect contractors in the modern era to finance big projects like this. They're not banks. And particularly when you get into synthetic turf and that sort of thing, you really will struggle if you don't have your budget and your cash flows correct. Now, at the same time, I'm not a big fan, and I don't even believe there is a mechanism. I could be proven incorrect by the lady from the department, but I don't think there is a mechanism for any upfront payment for facilities in this country. But what you can have is you can have a structured cash flow where you know when something's coming in, you certify it, you get the bill in. Okay? And that's what prevents the disputes. But the contract will determine, here is the procedure. If there is a dispute, you follow this procedure. And also, most importantly, it'll outline the payment terms, it'll outline the specification document, will be an appendix to it, but also don't forget that your responsibility on your end is also important. Design and build contractor-led, design and build consultant-led, and design-specific approach are the 3 types of procurement we have in this country. And I suppose the first one, design and build contractor-led, that's quite difficult to achieve in this country, and I'll tell you why. There's only 1, possibly 2 contractors in the country who actually have the proper insurance to do it and the proper facilities in-house to do it. And if you are insisting on going that line, you're better off insist that each of the contractors present themselves with a credible consultant. So it's not just a matter of going back to the contractor and say, you design it, build it, install it, turnkey, and we'll be happy. Because if it's a design issue with the pitch, the contractor can wash his hands of it. Particularly if he hasn't got professional indemnity experience, insurance. The design-specific approach is where we do a specific bill of quantities, a specific document, and a specific set of drawings that the contractor prices. And that tends to be a better way to do it in Ireland. However, we need to make sure that our measurements are correct and our documentation is very, very clear. A middle of the way approach is to tender it on that basis and tender it on that conditional contract, and then you choose as the client at last moment to flip it to design and build when you have the right man at the far side of the table. And that tends to be a fairly good option, that you tender it on the basis of measures, so everyone's competing with the same thing. You then review everything with the contractor, make sure he's very happy with everything, say, okay, we go turnkey, fine, you take the liability. But these are quite detailed engagements, and they're quite detailed discussions that you really have to go through. The procurement is let's face it, I mean, it's controversial in this country particularly, and I don't envy ye as officers who are charged locally with procuring work when, you know, unemployment in the country is still a significant issue, and you've got the local parish pump politics saying we've got 50 fellas down the street who are builders who need work, and you're building a pitch, you know, you need to look after your own. And that's still a fairly significant issue which you have to climb, and it's something you have to rise above, and that's something that a consultant can help you with, because essentially you're saying, well, you know what, your man is running it, we're administering it, we're not getting involved in that heavy end of procurement, because at the end of the day everybody has to be able to go to their local for a pint. And just because a contractor is local or whatever else, or he wants to do it, or there's a farmer that's after buying a digger somewhere and he's looking for work for the winter, you know, you have to measure the pros and cons to all that. And to be able to just put that aside and be able to essentially blame someone else and say, look, the consultant is running it, you know, it can be a big advantage. But when we get to contractor selection and shortlisting, we need to look at machinery. Has he got the right kit? We need to look at finances. What are his finances like for the last 3 years? Is he going to go broke? I was involved in a job recently where the contractor did go bust, and I had to draw down on the bond. And that was a huge process, and luckily I had a bond in place. But it's very, very expensive and difficult to get bonds at the moment. Experience. How long have they been trading? How many pitches have they actually built? Have they the staff, and have they good references? And the different routes to procurement, I know will be talked about later by the department, but I tend to favour more the advertisement than electronic procurement, because the electronic e-tender system can pose issues for smaller projects, particularly in terms of challenges, but also you can get 50 applications. Tender process and engagement with queries is also important. So if someone asks a query, you have to broadcast that query and the result to all the other contractors, and recording and broadcasting everything is very important. The tender should be returned to the club or an agreed representative of the club. I don't believe tenders should be returned to any consultants. I believe that it should be an open, transparent process where this is the club's money, so the tenders are returned to the club in sealed envelopes and opened by a number of members of the club. And they're written down then. And that's an insistence that I insist on. I will not accept tenders back to our office, because it just adds to potential issues. And you have to put yourself in the contractor's shoes. They're putting 2-3 weeks sometimes of work into trying to win this thing. And when they don't win it, or, you know, and they say, oh, well, that fella's tied in with this fella, and, you know, it just turns into a mess. So it's far cleaner, do it this way. Or even appoint a local solicitor, you know, for the sake of 200 quid or 100 quid, to get the envelopes, sign it, and there you go. And it's just more credible. Quality submission, so we'll review the quality aspect, we'll review the price submission and scoring. Interview and appointment. Interviewing, you have to be very, very careful with interviewing, because it can, as I said earlier, turn into a pony show, and suddenly there's promises being made in interviews, and if they're not recorded properly, you can get yourself into hot water from the procurement process. The management of unsuccessful bids is also important. Fellas are after putting 2 weeks of time into your bid. They're after travelling maybe half the length of the country to come see you. The least they deserve is an explanation, not just saying, you know, the big legal spiel is send them a letter saying thanks but no thanks, you're not successful. But I do like to give them some feedback on their submission to say why you weren't chosen, and that will tend to ease tensions for future, because the next project that comes along, I need them lads to bid with me again, And there's no point in getting their backs up and saying, I'm never going to win a job with Richard Hayden because, so you have to give them a bit of feedback to say where you were sitting in terms of your quality and your price and why the existing contractor actually won the job. And then the cooling off period is also important. You do have to allow a cooling off period from the award of the contract to the start. So when we get onto the site, we want to monitor the contract, we want to manage changes, and there will be changes to the contract, there will be issues that need to be solved, sign off payments and certs, and compliance with the contract quality and programme. And one quite controversial issue at the moment is sand, because sand is a really, really important, expensive part of any pitch build. And a sand doesn't have to be right down the centre of the curve. And it doesn't have to be absolutely perfectly down the middle. Yes, in a stadium situation, fine. But I am now looking around the country at different sands, and it's one of the things I can bring, which is quite unique to me, is take the sand away, analyse it. I'd prefer 100 mil of a sand which was non-compliant, but just outside the curve, than 10 mil of sand that's perfectly compliant, because you know which is going to work better. So these are decisions that need to be made, particularly when you're looking at geography. Most of the sand in the country comes from Wexford. Wexford is a long way from Sligo. It's a long way from Mayo. It's a long way from these places. It's a long way from Cork. When we're in Dublin, that kind of thing, it's pretty easy. But when we get to these other places, you do need to consider this. And this is a photo from a project from CRL there in Mayo last year, and it can be a kind of it's a pleasure to monitor some jobs where you've got good workmanship, nice neat workmanship. That's a nice manhole, just nice digging. That thing is 1.5 meters deep. I don't know how he got it so square. Dropping the manhole into place, everything is nice and neat. Versus some other pictures like this, which is just a complete mess. And that's really what we want to be avoiding. And again, that's where your consultant will come in. In terms of monitoring installation of drainage, this is also a big issue, because the slit drainage machine, if you rise that machine 50 mil, you're saving yourself 20 to 30% of materials. But yet it's not getting the connection with the drainage underneath. So these are the types of monitoring you have to do to make sure that the bid is compliant and the works are compliant. That's a picture where the slit drainage has gone through, and I'm measuring the depth to make sure it's getting that good connection underneath. Again, good weather conditions. Here's a grading of a subgrade. Nice weather conditions. The soil is coming off nicely. We get to the stage where we have our pitch in place, grow in and management. This is where things start to slow down. This is where the problems start. Because we have to have accurate descriptions and recommendations. Every club says, sure, look, we're running out of money now, we'll maintain it ourselves. If you're going to do that, there's a mechanism to do it, where the contractor maintains liability for your actions. He doesn't have to mow it, you mow it, but any problems that occur still remain with the contractor. Fertiliser and mowing are the two biggest issues I have in this country. And fertiliser is relatively cheap in the grander scheme of things. I have no problem using basic agricultural fertilisers at grow-in stage for pitches, as long as they're properly spread and they're evenly distributed. Obviously, we'd prefer to use the higher quality turf fertilisers, but if it means 2 tons of this fertiliser versus half a ton of the other stuff, I will make that decision to go with that. And training of the end user and handover is important. And here's just an example of a little fertiliser program where we have just the basic high level requirements of 350 kilos a month of each of those nutrients. Performance testing before the pitch is handed over. You have about a year's defects liability, where if there is a problem, we can look at getting it fixed. But if you leave that problem for 2 years, a little bit more of an issue. So that performance testing and handover is very, very important. And I like to include performance quality standards, but also a performance test to make sure that the surface has met its requirements in terms of levels, hardness, drainage, grass cover, grass species, traction, turf strength, thatch, moisture, rooting. You've got a document then to say, your man has measured this, it's okay. And aftercare and maintenance, finally, This is also an issue. I have one club at the moment who've built 4 pitches, spent £250,000, and the row at the moment is about petrol for the lawnmower. And my question is, you don't build that many pitches unless you can maintain them and unless you understand what you're getting yourself into. And I even had the discussion of letting 2 of the pitches go wild again purely because of the cost of maintaining them. And that's not a discussion we should be having. You know? And if proper process really, you know, where we had a good design plan, a good control plan, say this is how much it's going to cost to maintain them, was in place from the start, we could have saved them a lot of money. And I suppose, you know, when you ask the contractor, well, the contractor wants to build 4 pitches. He's not interested really in whether or not you can maintain it or not. He'll get in, build the 4 pitches, and then have the discussion afterwards. Well, that's your problem. But to mow 4 pitches 3 times a week, that's like driving a mower from here to Cork twice a week. That's the type of amount of time and the amount of mileage is going to be on that machine. So you're looking at a brand new machine, and you know, I mean, cost of that is phenomenal. So we then look finally at, you know, goal mouths. You see these pictures. This is a 2-year-old pitch, very high specification. Aftercare and mowing, that's the type of picture we do want to see. That's the kind of picture we don't want to see. You can see here, it's probably not that clear on this. Inaccurate fertilizer spreading, still an issue. This is one of my favourite pictures. This is a project that I delivered in Warrington in England. And that pitch was seeded in June, and they're going to use that in November. For Warrington Wolves Rugby Club. Very basic specification. Got a good break in the weather. You know, good installation, good products, and you know, everything is installed, ready to go. Good example of a model project. When we come to mowing, cylinder mowers will give you a much better cut, much better finish. However, the maintenance of these things is very, very high. Here's an example where we have to get them, and you have to have them cut. And if it doesn't cut paper, it won't cut grass. And when we try to cut the paper, and if it doesn't work, you need to get it sharpened, you need to get it adjusted. And although it can give you lovely striping and everything else, unless you're in a stadium situation, my recommendation is to go for a good, solid rotary collection mower. I just think the cylinders at this point, unless you have the confidence and the budget to maintain them, and unless you know what you're doing with them, you'll just end up spending money on something that's going to be causing you a problem in 3 or 4 years' time. And these types of mowers will suck up the divots, because you can't mow over divots with a cylinder. It'll just go into the cylinder and destroy it. And these modern types of mowers will suck up divots and remove them, as well as removing the grass. And finally, I do have I've an agreement made with the FAI that I'm going to probably do 10 complimentary visits around the country to pitch projects, be they natural or synthetic, in January as part of a subsidised FAI approach. So if any of you want to contact me before lunch, I may not be here after lunch because of travel commitments, but if any of you want to contact me, please feel free to do so. And I'll take your name and number, and I'll put you on the list, and we'll go down and have a chat and see what we can do as that initial stage, and that'll be complimentary, free of charge. So otherwise, we will have questions and answers after the next speaker, I think. So thanks very much for your time, and I look forward to talking to you later.